How to regenerate brain cells to enhance our lives. The guest on today's podcast from the Quantum Questions is Kim Baden-Kristensen. Kim is the CEO and co-founder of Brain Plus, an award-winning Danish health tech company specialising in digital therapeutics for brain disorders. Brain Plus aims to restore patients' independence and quality of life by treating and preventing brain disorders using the power of digital games to make motivating and empowering patients' experiences. Kim is a passionate advocate for digital health and is an active voice in the debates on European healthcare policy and industry. He has a degree in healthcare innovation from Harvard Business School and has studied cognitive neuroscience and neuropsychology at the University of Copenhagen.
Welcome, Kim, to the Quantum Questions podcast. I've been wanting to have you on this podcast since I met you and heard about the amazing things you're doing with Brain Plus. And it would be really lovely to hear some of your insights about the brain, the mind, and what we can do to improve this incredible tool we have that we usually just neglect, ignore, forget we even have sometimes, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Lucy. I'm happy to be here, and I love sharing whatever I can with whatever knowledge I have. So happy, looking forward to it.
So you do these really interesting cognitive tools, and in particular, you've done a lot of work with patients who have Alzheimer's and is it Parkinson's, I think it is, or is it dementia? And you've had a lot of success from what I understand, and you've got an award-winning program going on, and you've worked with a lot of healthcare professionals. Where is this success coming from? What is the magic formula you seem to be finding in this?
Yeah, first, I wouldn't claim that we've cracked the magic formula quite yet. I do think we've had many successes over the years, but we also still have a long way to go in terms of our ambitions within specifically dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So I can give a little bit of a background of Brain Plus and the company and what we're doing if you would like, and then that gives a better idea of some of your questions. So Brain Plus was founded in 2012, and our aim was to create computer-based cognitive training. And since then, the company has gone under an evolution, and now we have a more precise, you can say, aim, which is to help treat and detect Alzheimer's disease and dementia, again using cognitive training and stimulation with we call it digital therapeutics nowadays, which is medical software. But it's in the form of apps that you have on your smartphone or your tablet PC, and that people can use in their own homes, so they can use them at the clinic, etc. And then the way we create those is there are different ways, but some of them is to take already validated methods and then make those digital. So create a virtual coach, a virtual system for delivering these methodologies, and then we revalidate those in clinical trials. And we always, one of the, you can say, things that we believe very much in is to involve the patients and the clinicians. So the caregivers who are usually working with these patient groups, and how we actually create these solutions and these products. And then they're taken through kind of clinical trials. So this means gold standard clinical trials, which means that there's there's a group that gets the intervention, and then there are some control groups. Sometimes there are two control groups, an active control group and a passive control group. And then it gets quite technical on the scientific part. But that's kind of some of the things that we need to do to figure out, does this thing really work or not? And so that's why you mentioned Parkinson's as well. So you do trials in different kind of stages of maturity. So we have done a lot of pilot trials, and now we're doing some proof of concept trials, which is basically, as it sounds, to prove that the concept works. And so we have some positive interim results on those. So that's a success, I think, in some of the things that we're doing. I'd also still say that we have some way to go, but we have around 6 clinical trials that are in our program with different clinical partners. So this is really exciting, and a lot of those are, some of them are in dementia, some of those are in the people who are at risk of getting dementia. So there are certain groups that are at higher risk of getting dementia than others, and these are groups that we would like to target with potentially in the future also with prevention. And what's a good way to prevent? Well, there are many ways, but one of them is to keep your brain healthy and well functioning. That's one of them. The other main one is lifestyle. And if you want to talk about what also improves brain function, then lifestyle and stimulating and training the brain are some basic ways, no matter whether you have a disease or you're a perfectly healthy and normal individual. And I think, we'll probably get into that topic a bit more, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. And because, when we've had conversations prior to this, you've mentioned neuroplasticity. So I did actually look that up, and it is amazing how it is just something we can grow like a muscle, isn't it? In a physical muscle that can be developed. Whereas a lot of people have the thought, actually, you peak at 25, your brain, and then it's all downhill after that. And I'm actually curious whether that is the way we live life in modern society, or whether that is the fact at 25, there is thought to be this peak. Is it just something the way we live? Or is that a kind of biological thing that if we don't become aware, that is what happens?
So I'll give you some very different angles to that question, because there are different perspectives on that. I mean, one thing is that our brain is not fully developed until we're about 25. So the full functionality of the brain actually, it continues way after we turn 18, which in most Western countries is when we're considered adults. The development actually continues where we're not fully developed in all parts of the brain until we are in the early 20s. So does it go downhill from there? Only in some perspectives. We have different strengths and weaknesses at different points in life, I would say. One thing that is certain is that the brain has the ability to change, and we have the ability to learn new things and change the brain no matter our age. It goes all the way until we finally put our foot in the grave. Again, if we manage to keep a healthy lifestyle, we retain that plasticity and ability to learn no matter how old we are. So that's kind of, I think that's the really good news for everybody. There is this element of, on average, certain things will start declining around the midlife if you just look at the overall statistics. And that is something like in the brain, you have gray matter and you have white matter, 2 different types of matter you're talking about. Gray matter is all the neurons in the brain, so the nerve cells of the brain. And the white matter is fatty tissue that is wrapped around these neurons and their connections. And the fatty tissue makes the connections work more efficiently. It's called myelin, and they're kind of wrapped around a neuronal connection, like toilet paper you would wrap around your finger or your arm. That's actually literally how it works. It gets wrapped around.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Myelin, in terms of when you do brain imaging scans of people, that peaks around like late 40s or something like that. Again, this is like really an average, right? So whether it peaks much later for some people, I personally don't know. I don't know enough about it, but it doesn't change the fact that you stay able to learn all through your life. Just like certain hormones also peak when you're young, it means you have certain advantages, but the fact that those hormones are not as present later in life gives you other advantages, right? So it's just different things. And one thing that certainly does increase, no matter what, with age is obviously the amount of experience we have available to draw upon. But what's really interesting, I think, is that some of the more recent research shows that the adult brain has a learning capacity that seems to be similar to that of an adolescent brain if put under the right learning conditions, which means that there has to be a level of a certain level of motivation and engagement in the learning. And one thing that's extremely important for learning is focus. So the ability to focus your attention on the topic of the learning, and also your ability to process that, whatever you're learning, to process that on a deeper level, not just processing it on a superficial level. So if some of these conditions are in place, then you'll see like changes in the adult brain that can be on par with changes in the adolescent brain. So there can actually be there can even be a learning advantage when you're older, even though it's not a biological one. It's based on your knowledge of how to learn efficiently. Then there can be a learning advantage when you're an adult. Whereas the child brain is obviously extremely biologically very plastic, so more plastic than the adult brain. It will change faster, and it will even change until you reach an older age. It will change without even having any kind of mental filter for what is right or wrong. So whatever a child learns until it's again, and maybe a child neuroscientist or a neuroscientist would correct me. I'm not, by the way, just to my credentials is not within neuroscience, although I studied some cognitive psychology. My background, just for the sake of transparency here, is a master's degree in innovation from business school. But the reason I started a company that has to do with neuroscience, works with neuroscience, and having neuroscientists on my team, and having worked with it for 10 years, that is because it is a topic that interests me greatly. But in any case, a young child will create new connections for pretty much anything at certain ages during the growth. During the life of a young child, the brain will take a step back and say, okay, which of these connections are useful, which of them are not, and it will do what is called pruning the brain. And that means,
you say pruning?
Pruning, and it will basically cut away 50% of all connections in the brain. It does that twice during the lifetime of a human, during kind of, I think it's around 6 to 7 years of age. Maybe I'm wrong by a few years there, and it does it during adolescence as well. So it does it several rounds of pruning of the brain, and you don't really notice that, because these are just connections that have been formed when the brain was just massively creating connections due to its very high plasticity at a young age, and then the brain needs to kind of figure out which part of this am I using again and again, because that's one of the ways the brain kind of learns, is to say which neural networks or pathways in my brain are relevant. And the way it finds out if they're relevant is whether we use them again and again. That's why repetition is another key part of learning, is that we repeat the same behaviors, and then the brain becomes more and more used to it. And the neural connections that is managing those behaviors can also be attitudes, can also be thoughts. They become more and more efficient. It becomes easier and easier to do that. It becomes easier and easier to think that way, because the neural connections for those thoughts, those attitudes, those behaviors are becoming very, very efficient. So those are some interesting aspects of neuroplasticity. And then you're asking also, whether is there something else in the way we live as adults? I mean, and there certainly is, in the sense that for a lot of adults, we stop challenging ourselves at a certain age. We get into a certain career, and we take a certain type of job, and then we learn a craft really well, and we get fairly comfortable just using that to whatever extent we need to fulfill a certain job capacity, for example. And we get into a certain life situation, we get a family, etc., and then we get into an operating routine there without a lot of novelty, and I'm not saying it's not challenging to have a family. It can, of course, be, and there's a lot of learning, especially in the beginning with children. But in general, the degree of learning and new things that we have to take in or create an opinion about or find out how to solve becomes less and less with time for most people, unless we deliberately choose to actively seek out new challenges. And that's what the brain thrives on in terms of maintaining a strong brain health and creating strong connections and constantly building up the neural networks of the brain is constant learning and constant challenge.
Yeah, so it's really about waking up the curiosity in us, like the child's curiosity. And then you have the, as you say, the motivation to want to learn more, don't you? Because I think that's a lot of people can get very jaded in life and don't even think there's anything really worth learning anymore. So the first step is to want to learn, isn't it?
Yes, it's definitely a very, very important and useful skill, and finding whatever motivation you can. So curiosity is great, of course, but if you can't, seem to find the curiosity, then maybe you choose to do it because you now know that it's something that's really good for your health. Maybe that's motivating for you. So there can be different motivations that could lead you to do it, but curiosity is definitely a great first step and something to focus on having in your life at all times.
It is amazing to feel that we can keep our brain alive at any age, actually, because a lot of people do just feel this deterioration. And I've got a lot of friends going through menopause at the moment. I don't know what you've got to say about that, but you lose your brain in menopause. So many women feel that they do, and I don't know if that's avoidable, but
yeah, I can't say I know too much about the menopausal effects on the brain, but what I can say is that it's a fallacy that the brain is destined to deteriorate and that old people need to be somehow rigid or extremely slow and unable to learn new things or live, dynamic lives, because that's really not the case. But a lot of people assume that's the case, and they even assume that it's okay and normal for them to deteriorate when it's really not. But yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty tragic how many of the elderly are just shut in a room with the television and hardly see any other human beings. It's criminal, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and social stimulation and interaction is one of the most stimulating things that you can do for the brain, because when we're engaging socially, so many parts of our brain needs to be active. There are so many things that the brain is processing in social relationships. So one of the methods that we're working with in dementia is actually a method that is proven to increase attention and cognition, and that is one that facilitates a specific type of social interaction between people. So literally it requires two people to be speaking to each other, but they need to be speaking to each other not just about the weather is nice today. They need to reflect, think, assess, process things in depth, and this is the type of processing that's stimulating the brain. That's just one example. So you're absolutely right. It's people, we really need to get anybody at any age to not be on their own and to be socially engaged frequently and rather more than less.
What, out of interest, what would you say is a really beautiful success story you've had with someone you've worked with?
I mean, I can give you some anecdotal patient stories that we've had over the years. And again, I say this with the caveat that this is not we cannot claim that this means that the products work, because that's what the clinical trials are about proving. And you need a certain scale of people to actually say, yeah, now we can say that it works scientifically. But we've had some wonderful feedback from people with brain injury, for example, that have used one of our apps for cognitive training, and one woman who started using it, who was very very aggressive and couldn't speak very well, and she started using it very intensely, actually, not more so than we had recommended, but after a while her parents had actually called the clinician who had recommended the app to her and said that she had started speaking again, and she was starting to be calmer again. And so this is just one example of a story that makes us want to continue our work and really find out, is this something that we can bring to a larger audience? And is this something that we can really say with certainty that this is the effect that it has? And if you ask me personally, I have no doubt that these things are possible, and that a lot of people are being left in a state where much larger improvements could have been achieved if people have suffered, for example, from brain injury. And this is not the fault of anybody. There's a really big lack of resources in the healthcare system, unfortunately, and just a general problem. So it's not that the clinicians are doing a bad work or something like that. It's just that often it's a lack of resources that's the main problem. So this is a way we're trying to do something that will alleviate that problem and give more access to people, so they have something that they can use with support or on their own to basically recover better.
Yeah. Well, I really acknowledge you for doing it, Kim. I mean, it's such a gift to try and improve that part of society in particular that's often very neglected. And I think it is so important. No one deserves to be put on the trash heap, do they?
No, absolutely not.
And also it seems that, by doing this work with people with problems like dementia and Parkinson's, you're learning just how to use the brain, which anyone can benefit from. You don't have to even have brain conditions. So the listeners today that may not have any of these health issues, mental health issues, can benefit from focus of attention, for example, like you were saying. We can all benefit from that. And that actually grows the neurons in the brain, you're saying, is that right?
Training your attention definitely strengthens the neural networks in the brain. So in terms of the actual mechanisms, now you're saying grow the neurons. So there are different mechanisms, neuroplastic mechanisms, if you want to call them by this more technical name, but different ways to make your brain stronger, basically. And one of them is neurogenesis, and that means actually growing new neurons in the brain. And this is still something that now there is more evidence for it, but it's not the most common thing. What's common in neuroplasticity is that the neuronal connections can get stronger, in the sense that I explained before, that more of this kind of fatty tissue is wrapped around them, which makes them more efficient. They can get more synchronized in how they fire their signals, their electrical signals, which will also make them more efficient. They can grow new connections between the neurons. So the neuron is the cell, kind of the microprocessor, and each neuron can have up to 40,000 new connections. Some of the nerve cells, some of the neurons that have the most connections have 40,000. I think the average is more around 10,000 connections to other neurons. And so new connections can be grown between different neurons. So this is one of the ways that they strengthen, and some of these other ways that I was just talking about.
Because I know that you do a lot of meditation. So I'm not sure what came first. Did the meditation come before you got involved with this subject you're in, or was it the other way around? And did it encourage you to meditate more? So the more consistent disciplined meditation probably came after, but I think I was exposed to meditation at an earlier stage in life, because my parents have been open to that and to the more spiritual world and yoga, etc., for as long as I've been alive. So I tried it earlier on, but I really got interested in it seriously perhaps 10 years ago, and started practicing it more seriously. And already back then there were more studies about
the positive impact of meditation on the brain and on your ability to focus and on even potential mental health. And now the evidence, the scientific evidence for that is just very, very overwhelming is a big word, but there's a lot of, let's just say that there are thousands of studies now supporting the positive benefits of meditative practices on the brain and on the mental health of people, their ability to, for example, resist stress, so people have higher resilience towards that as well when they meditate. Meditation is, for me, probably one of the most effective methods for training your ability to control your attention. There are many different types of meditation, and some of them are training different, let's say, different aspects of attention, because you can say there are different abilities that are part of your ability to be attentive to different things. One of them is to hold your attention continuously on the same thing for an extended period of time. Another ability is your ability to continue doing that in the face of distracting stimulus from other sources. Then you have the ability to have your attention divided on different things at the same time as well. So this is called divided attention. And there's also your ability to how quickly you can switch your attention and then be fully engaged with whatever new thing that you're being attentive to. And there is also your ability to be completely open in your attention and really broadly take in a lot of different stimulus at once. So there are all these different, you can say, aspects of attention that are really interesting. And I think in meditation, if we just want to make it simple, you can say that there are a couple of basic types of attention, and one is one where you really focus the attention on one thing and you try to keep it there continuously. And this is really, really excellent practice for your ability to focus. And then, you tried that yourself, Lucy. So
yeah, sure,
you have some experience with that.
And how does this compare to when you're saying like learning lots of new things, trying lots of new things, compared to just focusing on one thing all the time? Because it almost sounds contradictory, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you're gaining different benefits from it, you could say, because the attention function is one of the fundamental brain functions that you have, and it's kind of like a part of the engine, you could say, in the brain, and training that one specifically strengthens particularly your ability to focus. Now, when you have a better ability to focus, your ability to learn new things becomes much better. I mean, although it's just an analogy, but it's like you get more bandwidth to kind of get the information in, or you have less kind of, if you imagine that you're like learning things continuously, you have fewer gaps because you're losing attention, for example, in what you're getting in, right? So your ability to hold your attention is kind of also a measure of how quickly you can learn, because the better you can focus, the quicker you can learn, the more efficiently you can learn. The learning itself, like learning a new skill, is very valuable, but it builds other parts of the brain, right? Where the attention function is all of these different sub-functions I talked about, they're located in slightly different places of the brain. But to simplify it a little bit, a lot of it's focused in the frontal part of the brain, is where a lot of you'll often call it the mental control center of the brain, or where the executive functions, like the executive team in a business, the executive functions, they're in the frontal part of the brain. Whereas when you're learning a new skill, it can be located in many different parts of the brain. If it's, for example, something that involves movement, you have the motor cortices of the brain involved in that. You have something called the cerebellum, which is a very old part of the brain which governs fine motor movements, is involved in that. So you will then be strengthening other parts of the brain by learning different skills, right? And ultimately, you can say the more the more gray matter and the more white matter you have and you build up during your lifetime, the more you will have to kind of draw upon as you age, because there is the fact that as we do age, we do have a decline in gray matter and white matter. That is a fact. Not so much necessarily that we can function extremely well, healthily, and keep learning, but there is a decline. And so it is beneficial to have plenty of gray matter and white matter, which we can then build up during our lives by learning new things. So that's one of the differences.
Yeah. And out of interest, the other question that I wanted to ask is, when in the path of yoga that we're both doing at the moment, it's a lot about focusing on the heart and following your heart in life. How does that come into putting so much emphasis on growing your brain and increasing your neurons? How does that relate to that? And maybe a silly question, but I'm just curious how you'd answer that.
Yeah, I can give like some personal thoughts on it rather than what I would call any scientific facts, because I wouldn't claim to be an expert in this subject matter, you could say. I think, first of all, there's a strong kind of interface between the heart and the brain, and for a lot of the things when we talk about using, like following your heart or using your heart, a lot of that is also related to, as I understand it, not just the physical heart as we understand it, although that plays a role, and the physical heart also has its own neurons, and neurons are actually distributed throughout our body. Just the most of them are up here in the brain, but we have the heart has, I think it's around 50,000 neurons itself. But using your brain holistically, meaning using both sides of the brain and preferably using them in unison, simultaneously engaging them at the same time, that is certainly part of the correlation, and perhaps part of not necessarily the whole part of, but a part of what we are talking about when we talk about using our intuition or choosing with our heart. We tend to have a very, you can say, left brain focused way of processing the world, at least in the Western world. Left brain is the one that categorizes everything, labels everything. It's where we have kind of our ability to put words on things, and to analyze things logically and put them into boxes. Where the right hand side of the brain is, the right hemisphere of the brain is more the creative part, the more holistic part, and so learning to engage both of those at the same time can at least help us get us more into that space of intuition and help get us more into what we call the heart in yoga. Whether then the heart is something more, and I think if you take it from a yoga philosophy perspective, then the heart is something that is actually beyond the physical, right? It's beyond the physical brain, it's beyond the physical body, and then we get a bit more into metaphysics, which again I can't say much about from a scientific perspective. I can just say that I've certainly experienced some of these at least states that relate to that feeling of being in the heart with some of the meditations that I've done and some of the yoga that I've done. But I think there's a strong correlation with reaching that state, with really having a strong ability to calm the mind and modulate your nervous system, your brain and your central nervous system, and modulate that to become into a very calm state. So you go from being in this kind of very the mind being very active, thoughts being very active, which typically how most people are operating during the day when they're at work. The mind is extremely active, and we're always analyzing things, and we're always thinking about time how to solve things, etc. And we're in what is called, and the brain waves, you can measure the frequency of the brain waves. We're in what we're called beta brain waves, which is quite high frequency waves. And then as you start meditating, and often, not always, but often the state of our nervous system is in a more sympathetic state, which is more arousal, which also means more in what is often referred to as the fight, flight, or freeze part of the network. And as we start calming the mind and the nervous system, we move into a more parasympathetic state, which is when we're more calm, we rest, we digest. And this also happens when we start meditating. We're starting to calm the mind down, and the brain will start moving from beta waves to alpha waves, which are slower waves where beta waves is kind of have higher frequency. Alpha waves are slower waves with higher amplitudes. And as we keep going deeper, we can actually go even into deeper brainwave states like delta waves and theta waves. And some of these waves are the same waves we have when we're sleeping, except when we're meditating, we're not sleeping. So there's definitely a correlation with some of these states that we have in the brain. And then also when we refer to being in the heart, I do think it's really fascinating to consider some of this thing that is not directly biological in terms of the electromagnetic fields of the body, and potentially even more subtle metaphysical realms, let's call them that. But even some scientists today are really strongly advocating and have made research into the mind actually being an entity that is connected and correlated strongly to the brain, but it's not the same thing as the brain. It's not like the biological substance of the brain is the same thing as your mind. Just as in yoga, we wouldn't say that the heart is the same thing as the brain. It's not just a figment of our brain. There's something more than the brain. So, I mean, this topic is super fascinating. And what I really enjoy seeing is that slowly more and more science is starting to kind of overlap with some of these more traditional spiritual teachings from yoga. And we're seeing more and more correlations there. And we're starting to get the benefits of some of the yogic traditions in the more mainstream with yoga and meditation, and hopefully we'll also start getting some of the deeper benefits that can potentially be derived from some of these traditions, I hope. Anyways, feel free to barge in, because I just
yeah, no, it's absolutely a fascinating subject, and really that brings me to the subject of consciousness then. So really, if your focus of attention is good and you've got better brain health, like in terms of neurons, does that automatically then expand your consciousness? I mean, because you could be a genius with many neurons, couldn't you, and not have a massive consciousness. So I don't quite know what the question is, but there's something in there about.
Yeah, I think I see some of the question. I mean, one implicit question, what you're saying is whether consciousness is correlated to, or is correlated to the kind of the state of the brain's health or the mass of the brain, etc. And first of all, I would just take another step back and say, we really don't know what consciousness is at this point in time. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of theories about consciousness, and there are different schools of thought about what consciousness is. And the classic, you can say, and probably still dominant school of thought right now, is that consciousness is a byproduct of the firings of the neurons in our brain. This sense of self-awareness and the self of being, and the sense of being a person, and this subjective experience of life that we have, that is just a byproduct, you can say, of neurons in our brain firing. And then there's another school of thought, which is the one that is aligned with the yogic traditions and the spiritual traditions, which is that consciousness is more a background of everything in existence, and it exists in various forms, even down at the molecular level. And once molecules come together in certain configurations, it becomes sufficiently, you can say, dense to become self-aware, right? That's a different school of thought, and that's a longer debate. And I think, first of all, consciousness is a fascinating matter, and I think that's why the something like yoga, which is a 4,000-year-old tradition, and has done nothing else but study consciousness in with those tools that are available there, and you find some of the most detailed and interesting descriptions of consciousness. And I think it's really, I think science has a lot to potentially unveil there if it would, you can say, dare to look further into some of these principles that are being described in some of the yogic traditions. And they're not, and as you know, this, I think you're working with the quantum questions, right? And that's where this is one of the interesting fields of science where you start seeing potential very interesting correlations between ancient texts and how the universe is actually, based in terms of quantum physics, is actually functioning. And there are so many unanswered questions in quantum physics that science also hasn't been able to answer. So I think there's this great opportunity for, first of all, like humility for us as humans, and also as potential scientists, those of us who are, in terms of just knowing that we still know very little, right, about both consciousness and how the universe works. What we know already is great, is wonderful, and it's amazing that we know as much as we do, but we still know very, very little. And so there could be great discoveries still awaiting us in that realm as well, if we should choose to go down that path and look deeper into that. But meditation certainly has gotten its time in the limelight and has gained the respect, also scientifically, that it deserves, in terms of some of the, let's say, basic benefits that are biological health, mental health, etc.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Kim. And I love the way you do have a foot in both worlds, the science and the spiritual world, and you're trying to bring the two together in many ways, aren't you? What would you give us some leaving tips to the listeners today for improving their brain, or any particular apps that you've got that would, I don't know, that are maybe new apps or something that you think would be good? Or I think meditation is obviously a good tool everyone can deal with, but
yeah, so if I should avoid any advertising, then I'd rather stick with some I think simpler non-advertising advice here. So I think there are some basics that are really important for good brain function and good brain health, and some of those are basic lifestyle things, like get your good quality sleep and get enough of it. That's one of them, and there are many ways to get better at fixing that, and that can be, reading a book like How to Sleep by Matthew Walker, excellent. Why We Sleep, for example. There are lots of tips on how to sleep better, but you just go online and you look into it, and there are plenty of tips, because it's really, it's not rocket science, but for some reason we find it very hard to get into a good sleeping pattern. But getting into our natural sleeping pattern and making sure that we get enough sleep, high quality sleep, that's one key. A good diet and exercise, other keys, right? Because this is simply about, the brain is just as much a part of our biological body as the rest of our body. So getting the right nutrients for that, getting the right cardiovascular health to support the brain is also super important. So looking into diet, right? Anything that is kind of processed sugars, processed foods is not extremely healthy for the brain. Lots of variety of vegetables, lots of variety of healthy fats. These are some of the good things for the brain. So those are some basics. Otherwise, learning new skills all the time, like continuously being a lifelong learner, that's a great approach for anybody, whether that is depending on one's interest, learning new languages, learning how to dance, learning some new topic in whatever field interests the listener. They're all fine and all very good, you know. Staying socially very engaged and active and curious, like you said, like staying curious is a very good one. Starting to meditate is an excellent way to keep the brain healthy and fit, because it has those, not only the benefits of training the attention, but that benefit spills over into other parts of life in terms of having a more stable mental health. Because once you calm the mind, you'll find that most of the mental health issues today, they are related to, or even a result of, our inability to control the mind's ruminations and thinking and so forth. And meditation helps you with exactly that. You help learn to quiet your mind and calm your mind down. And then you'll also calm some of, if there are any symptoms like that, you learn to, those will also get calm. And if you start meditating for longer and longer periods, they will even disappear potentially. So definitely learning to meditate, and there are now many meditation apps out there, but I would recommend to anybody to go and take an actual course and get a teacher. That's definitely a much better way to get it to become a more permanent and deep practice than to go with just an app on the smartphone. So those would be some of my recommendations.
Okay, that's fabulous. Thank you. And thank you so much for your time, Kim. It's been a real honor having you here.
Yeah,
and I've learned quite a few things I didn't know. So it was wonderful.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I hope to have you again.
Yeah, wonderful. We'll do that.
Bye, Kim.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
If you would like to know more about the quantum questions, please go to the website www.thequantumquestions.com.